December 15, 1889. The Sierra Blanca Mountains offered no sanctuary for the dying, only the promise of becoming wolf meat beneath unforgiving stars. Elise Carter stumbled through snow that reached her waist, each step a monumental effort that sent lightning bolts of pain through muscles pushed far beyond their limits. The cedar chest clutched against her breast had become an instrument of torture, its brass corners having long since shredded her threadbare gloves and left her knuckles raw bleeding crimson drops that marked her desperate trail through the wilderness. Emmett would have laughed at me. She thought bitterly, her mind drifting to memories that had once brought comfort, but now felt sharp as broken glass. His strong hands, lifting this same chest effortlessly, his secretive smile, when I asked what treasures he kept locked away. "Someday, darling," he'd always said, "when the time is right." But the time had never been right, had it? And now I'm dying in these mountains, carrying his secrets without even knowing what they are. The wolf pack had been hunting her since dawn, and their yellow eyes gleaming with predatory intelligence as they paced her failing steps through the dense timber. She could smell them now, the musk of wild fur, the metallic scent of old kills, the patient hunger that had sustained their kind through countless winters, when human settlements were nothing but distant dreams. Her stomach cramped with a hollowness that went beyond mere hunger. 3 days without food had transformed her 23-year-old body into a fragile shell-black spots, dancing at the edges of her vision like carrion birds circling overhead. The irony wasn't lost on her, she who had prided herself on keeping others fed, who had stretched every precious scrap during those terrible months after the mine collapse, was now herself starving in this vast wilderness. "Is this what you felt, Emmett?" The thought came unbidden, accompanied by the memory of his final moments as other miners had described them. That sudden knowledge that death was coming, that all your secrets would die with you. Except you made sure they wouldn't, didn't you? You made sure I'd carry this damn chest, even if I never knew why. Her breath came in ragged gasps that tore at her throat, each exhalation forming clouds of vapor that seemed to freeze instantly in the bitter December air. The cold had long since penetrated her worn coat, seeping through threadbare wool to settle deep in her bones. Her feet wrapped in boots that had been resoled twice with leather scraps no longer belonged to her. They were distant things that moved when she willed them to leaving their own trail of darkening spots where frostbite had begun its inexorable work. A low growl, deep as distant thunder, froze her blood solid. 50 yards ahead, the alpha male emerged from a tangle of snow-laden branches, a massive gray beast with battle scars crisscrossing his muzzle like ancient war paint. His lips peeled back to reveal fangs yellowed with age and sharpened by countless victories, while his pale eyes held the cold calculation of a creature that had survived by knowing exactly when prey had reached the end of its endurance. So this is how it ends, Elise thought, with crystalline clarity that comes in moments of absolute desperation. The strange peace that settled over her felt almost like relief. Not in a warm bed surrounded by loved ones, not even quick like Emmett's death under the mountain. Torn apart by wolves, and no one will ever know what became of Elise Carter. The creditors won their war. After all, they just had to wait for winter and wolves to collect. Behind the alpha, 2 smaller wolves materialized from the shadows, flanking her escape routes, with the practiced precision of hunters who had performed this deadly dance 1,000 times before. The forest fell silent, except for the whisper of wind through pine needles and the thunderous hammering of her own heart against her ribs. But as death approached on 4 legs, her grip on the cedar chest tightened with sudden fierce defiance. No, she decided with the stubbornness that had kept her alive through poverty, grief, and the endless cruelty of men who saw widows as easy prey. If I'm going to die out here, I'm going to die fighting. And whatever secrets you hid from me, Emmett Carter, they're going to die with me, unless someone better than wolves finds them. The alpha tensed every muscle in his powerful frame, coiling like steel springs. Time seemed to stretch into infinity as he launched himself through the frigid air. Jaws gaping wide enough to crush her windpipe, in a single, merciful bite. Elise threw up her arms in what she knew was a futile gesture of protection, and the chest swinging wide, knowing it was useless but unable to surrender without some final act of defiance. The rifle crack split the mountain's silence like the voice of an avenging angel. The wolf twisted in midair, a crimson spray erupting from his shoulder as the bullet found its mark with surgical precision. He crashed into the snow 3 feet from where Elise stood transfixed, yelping in pain and confusion before scrambling away on 3 legs. The rest of the pack vanished into the timber like smoke, dissipating in wind, leaving only the acrid smell of gunpowder and the echo of salvation hanging in the crystalline air. Elise's legs gave out entirely, and she collapsed into the blood-stained snow, violent sobs of relief racking her body as the cedar chest tumbled from her nerveless fingers and landed with a muffled thump beside her. The release of terror left her shaking more violently than the cold ever had, great gulping cries that seemed to tear themselves from her very soul. "Easy there, miss." The voice carried the careful cadence of someone who had learned English as a second language, but spoke it with quiet authority born of natural leadership. "The danger's past now. You're safe." Through her tears of gratitude and exhaustion, Elise saw him approaching with the fluid grace of someone who belonged to this harsh landscape as completely as the trees and stones. Chaveo stood well over 6 feet tall, his lean frame wrapped in a fur-lined buckskin coat that spoke of skilled hunting and meticulous preparation for mountain winters. His weathered face bore the high cheekbones and dark eyes of Apache heritage, while decades of sun and bitter weather had etched lines that suggested both wisdom and constant vigilance. Apache Elise realized with a start of fear that had nothing to do with her salvation and everything to do with stories she'd heard in towns across the territory. But as she studied his face, searching for signs of the savagery white men claimed to see in all Indians, she found only careful compassion and something that might have been recognition of a fellow survivor. He held his Winchester rifle with the casual competence of someone who had never missed when a life depended on accuracy, smoke still curling from the barrel like incense rising to heaven. Despite the deadly weapon in his hands, something in his manner, a gentleness in how he moved, a careful respect in how he regarded her obvious distress, told Elise that she had encountered not another threat, but perhaps the first genuine safety she had known in months. Ayanna always said, "I could read people's hearts in their eyes," Chaveo thought as he studied the collapsed woman. His sister's voice seemed to whisper from the wind itself, bringing with it the familiar ache of loss that 10 years had never fully dimmed. This white woman's eyes held the particular hollow desperation he'd seen in refugees from both sides of the Apache wars, the look of someone who had lost everything but their life and wasn't entirely certain that was a mercy. But there was something else there too, a stubborn core of steel that had kept her moving when most would have laid down to die. That kind of strength was rare and precious, regardless of the skin that contained it. "Wolves been tracking you long?" he asked, helping her to unsteady feet with hands that were strong but infinitely gentle. "Since sunrise." Elise managed her voice barely above a whisper. The sweet scent of wood smoke drifted to her on the mountain breeze, the most beautiful smell she had ever encountered, carrying with it the promise of warmth, food, and the simple miracle of human companionship. Her stomach cramped at the thought of real food, and she swayed on her feet as hope and hunger warred in her weakened body. "I caught the smell of your fire." She continued, forcing strength into her voice that she didn't feel. "I was hoping, praying." She trailed off, unwilling to admit the depths of her desperation to this stern-faced stranger who had already saved her life. "You were hoping for mercy from strangers in a land that shows precious little of it." Chaveo observed, studying her hollow cheeks and the desperate hunger carved into her features like chisel marks in marble. He recognized the careful dignity in how she held herself despite her obvious need, pride that ran deeper than circumstance could erode. Such people were worth saving, worth the risk of bringing another mouth to feed when winter stores already ran dangerously low. What can you offer in fair trade for food and shelter? He asked, not unkindly, but with the practical directness of someone who knew that charity alone couldn't sustain a community through mountain winters. I cook, she said, summoning strength from some deep reservoir of will she hadn't known still existed within her battered spirit. The words came from muscle memory from years of proving her worth in kitchens and boarding houses, where women with no other skills had to make themselves indispensable or starve. I cook well, and I work hard, and I'll earn every scrap you spare me. I'm not asking for charity, just a chance to prove my worth. It wasn't begging. It was a straightforward business proposition between equals, the kind of honest negotiation that kept people alive on the frontier, where weakness was a luxury few could afford. Chaveo had encountered enough desperate souls in his 35 years to distinguish between victims and survivors, and something in this woman's bearing told him she belonged firmly in the latter category. She reminds me of you, sister, he thought, remembering Ayana's fierce determination to provide for her infant daughter, even as fever consumed her strength. The same fire that won't be extinguished, no matter how cold the world becomes. Before he could respond, a small voice piped up from behind a massive ponderosa pine, whose bark bore the scars of decades weathering mountain storms. Papa Chaveo, who's that lady with the pretty box? Nayeli emerged from her hiding place with the cautious curiosity of a 10-year-old who had learned early to read adults for signs of safety or danger. Her dark hair was woven into neat braids, decorated with blue glass beads that caught the afternoon light like captured sky, and her deerskin dress showed the careful needlework of hands that took pride in their craft. Despite her youth, her dark eyes held wisdom beyond her years, the kind that came from experiencing loss too early, but being raised by someone who understood the difference between hardship and hopelessness. The child studied Elise with solemn attention, taking in every detail from her cracked boots to her ice-crusted coat. But instead of the wariness that white strangers usually inspired, Nayeli's expression held something approaching hope, a longing so carefully contained that it broke Elise's heart to witness it. She's never had a mother's touch, Elise realized with sudden piercing clarity. The recognition hit her like a physical blow, because she saw in this child's careful composure the same aching need she had carried through her own motherless childhood. 10 years old and already protecting herself from disappointment. Oh, little one, I know that hurt. The lady was lost in the snow. Chaveo explained gently, his voice softening in a way that transformed his stern features. The wolves were hunting her, but she's safe now. Naelli nodded solemnly, then looked up at her guardian with an expression of hopeful questioning that transformed her serious features into something approaching joy. The question that followed carried the weight of years spent without feminine comfort dreams, carefully guarded against the harsh reality of their isolated existence. Can she tuck me in too? Nayeli asked softly, her words hanging in the frozen air like a bridge spanning impossible distances. The simple question struck both adults with unexpected force. Chaveo felt the full weight of the child's longing. She had been without feminine comfort for 10 long years, ever since tragedy had made him her sole guardian and protector. He had done his best to be both father and mother to her. But there were aspects of nurturing that seemed to flow more naturally from women's hearts and hands. For Elise, the question awakened something she had thought died with her miscarriages and the maternal instinct that had ached emptily through her brief marriage, finding expression only in the care she showed boarders and neighbors. This child's need called to that buried part of her soul with irresistible force. Is this why you brought me here? She wondered, looking up at the darkening sky, as if it might hold answers. Through wolves and blizzards and near death to find the daughter I could never have. Food first. Chaveo decided with a slight nod that somehow managed to convey both acceptance and the caution that kept them all alive in this unforgiving country. Questions and stories can wait until after we've got some warmth back in your bones. As they began the trek toward the camp, none of them noticed the figure crouched behind a windfall of dead timber 200 yards upslope. Victor Ransom lowered his expensive field glasses and spat a stream of tobacco juice into the pristine snow, his pale eyes calculating as he studied the reunion taking place below. So the widow survived after all, he mused, his mind already working through the implications. And that chest she's carrying, if it contains what I think it does, then all my problems might be solved with one bold stroke. The mine owner had been tracking movement in his valley for weeks, and that cedar chest the woman carried looked mighty interesting to a man who understood that legal documents often meant the difference between wealth and poverty in the territorial system. He mounted his well-fed horse and rode toward Copper Gulch, his breath forming clouds in the bitter air as his mind raced through possibilities. The Apache camp had been a thorn in his side for too long, and their presence complicating his plans to claim every water source in the valley. But if that chest contained the papers, he suspected then legal pressure might succeed where intimidation had failed. One way or another, he decided with cold finality, that camp will be empty before spring, and every drop of water in this valley will flow through my operation. Among Victor's hired guns was a man known throughout the territory as Quiet Will, a thin, unnaturally calm individual whose reputation for reading dangerous situations was matched only by his skill with firearms. But lately, Will had been watching his employer's methods with growing unease, memories of his own sister's death in a mining accident, stirring conscience he'd thought long buried. Mary always said I had good hands for healing. He remembered studying his weathered palms as if they might hold answers to the moral complexities that plagued his sleep. Before the war, before everything went wrong, she believed I could be something better than this. What would she think of what I've become? Victor's willingness to target women and children, to burn homes and destroy lives in pursuit of profit, was crossing lines that even a professional gunfighter found difficult to stomach. Each night, Will found himself staring at the photograph he carried of Mary and their childhood together, wondering when exactly he had stopped being her brother and become the kind of man their father had warned them against. The camp at Willow Springs, nestled in a natural bowl where towering pines gave way to granite shelves and meadows that would burst with wildflowers come summer. Now blanketed under several feet of December snow, it possessed the stark beauty of a landscape carved by ice and geological time. The narrow creek that gave the place its name wound through the valley's heart, barely 4 feet wide, but running deep and clear, its constant murmur, providing both music and the promise of survival to those who understood water's precious value in this high country. 25 souls had chosen to winter here rather than face the uncertainty of reservation life, or the outright hostility of towns that still viewed Apache heritage as cause for suspicion and fear. They lived under canvas and carefully prepared hide shelter structures that could withstand mountain storms while remaining portable enough to be moved quickly if circumstances demanded flight or relocation. The community moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned that survival depended on everyone fulfilling their role without waste or complaint. Children helped with tasks sized to their abilities, elders shared wisdom and skills with patient instruction, and every adult understood that their individual welfare was inseparable from the group's collective fate. This is what we fought to preserve, Chaveo thought, as he guided Elise through the camp's orderly arrangement. Not just our lives, but our way of caring for each other, of raising children who understand that strength comes from standing together. Chaveo moved among them with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned leadership through deed rather than appointment, his authority flowing from years of keeping these families alive when government promises proved as fragile as spring ice. Once a scout for the Army during the bloody final years of the Apache Wars, he had learned to read both the harsh landscape and the even harsher political currents that shaped his people's fate in an increasingly white man's world. You would be proud of how we've survived, Ayana. He thought his sister's memory a constant presence in the decisions that shaped their daily lives. Not just survived, prospered. The children are learning our traditions alongside the white man's writing in numbers. We bend like willow branches in the storm, but don't break. When the wars officially ended in 1886, he had guided this small band north to a place where they might live according to ancestral traditions, while staying carefully within the boundaries of laws that now govern their existence. It was a delicate balance requiring constant vigilance and the wisdom to know when to stand firm and when to bend like mountain pines in a storm. His left knee bore the constant ache of an old wound, a cavalry bullet that had shattered bone during a skirmish near the Mexican border that he hadn't started but had been forced to finish when words failed and survival demanded action. The injury had healed crooked despite medical attention, leaving him with a pronounced limp that worsened whenever storms approached. It was a small price for survival, but one that reminded him daily how quickly fortune could turn in this unforgiving territory. Every scar tells the story of a choice, he reflected, feeling the familiar throb as he walked. Some choices we make freely, others are forced upon us, but all of them shape who we become. The smells of the camp wrapped around Elise like an embrace, wood smoke seasoned with pine pitch, the clean scent of snow and fresh air, the rich aroma of stewing meat that made her hollow stomach clench with desperate hunger. But underneath these immediate sensations, she detected something else. The indefinable feeling of home, of people caring for one another, despite the hardships that surrounded them. When did I last feel this? She wondered, accepting a steaming bowl of rabbit stew from gentle hands. This sense of belonging, of being wanted, rather than merely tolerated. The memory came from childhood, from the brief years before her parents' death, when poverty had been a temporary inconvenience, rather than a permanent state of being. Elise found her rhythm in this close-knit community, with the instinctive efficiency of someone who had learned to make herself indispensable wherever fate deposited her. She cooked with measured precision, understanding through bitter experience that every strip of jerky, every pinch of precious salt, every drop of rendered fat had to stretch as far as humanly possible to keep people alive through winter's hungry months. Her movements around the cooking fire spoke of intimate familiarity with hardship and scarcity. She could hone a blade on rough stone until it would part silk without resistance, and she scrubbed every pot and pan until it gleamed like polished silver. These were skills learned not in comfortable kitchens, but during the desperate months after Emmett's death, when creditors had descended like vultures to strip away everything she thought she owned. I know how to make meals from scraps, she reflected, stretching yesterday's leftover bones into today's rich broth. How to make a home from whatever shelter I can find, how to find warmth in the kindness of strangers. Maybe losing everything taught me how to appreciate what truly matters. But it was in the quiet moments between tasks that the memories haunted her most. Her husband had died in a mine shaft collapse the previous October, crushed beneath tons of rock and shattered timber when a support beam gave way during autumn rains. The accident had happened so suddenly that other miners claimed he never felt pain, though whether that was truth or the kind of mercy people offered to the grieving Elise had never been certain. You were trying to tell me something. That last morning she remembered the scene playing in her mind with painful clarity. Standing by the door with your hat in your hands, looking like you wanted to say something important. But I was busy with breakfast, impatient to get on with the day's tasks. What were you trying to tell me, Emmett? Was it about the chest? About secrets that might have saved us both? All she had managed to salvage from their modest cabin before bank representatives arrived with legal papers was this cedar chest that Emmett had kept locked throughout their brief marriage. The rest furniture bought with careful savings, and the small luxuries that had made their house feel like home had been seized and sold to satisfy debts she hadn't known existed. The chest held mysteries she had never dared explore, secrets that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Emmett had been oddly secretive about his past, claiming only that he had worked various mining claims throughout the territory before settling in Copper Gulch to make what he called an honest living. The key to the chest hung on a leather thong beneath her bodice, close to her heart, but never used. Some frightened part of her feared what revelations might be hidden within that weathered wood, what painful truths might shatter the few fond memories she had managed to preserve. Maybe it's better not to know, she told herself for the 100th time. Some doors are better left locked. Some questions don't need answers. But even as she tried to convince herself, the weight of the key against her chest seemed to mock her cowardice. Whatever lay hidden in the chest, it belonged to her now. Emmett's choices had died with him, but their consequences lived on in the secrets he'd left behind. Nayeli became her constant shadow, drawn by curiosity and the novel experience of having another woman in the camp. The girl peppered her with endless questions about cooking techniques, why butter hissed when it hit hot iron, how bread dough felt when properly risen, why the silver fork that Elise kept carefully polished was never used for eating. She starved for feminine company, Elise realized, as she watched the child absorb every gesture, every word, with intense concentration. 10 years of learning the world from a man's perspective, no matter how loving. She needs to see how women move through the world, how they solve problems, how they express care. That fork had been a wedding gift from Emmett, one of the few luxuries she had managed to keep during her desperate flight from Copper Gulch. She maintained its shine more from stubborn habit than from any realistic hope that she would ever again have occasion for such refinements. It served as a tangible connection to a life that now seemed as distant and unreachable as childhood dreams. "Why don't you use it?" Naelli asked one evening, watching Elise polish the silverware with careful attention. "It's too fine for everyday meals." Elise replied the answer automatic, after months of protecting her few remaining treasures. But looking into the child's curious eyes, she reconsidered. "When will I use it, if not now? When I'm rich again, when I have a proper house and servants to cook for me." The absurdity of saving something for a future that might never come struck her with sudden force. What good is a silver fork if it's never used? What good are any of our treasures if we're too afraid to enjoy them? But maybe, she added slowly, special things become more special when they're shared with people we care about. The smile that lit Naeli's face was worth more than any silver ever mined from these mountains. When darkness settled over the camp each evening, bringing with it the particular quiet that comes when snow muffles every sound, and the world seems wrapped in cotton silence, Nayeli would linger by her bedroll, with the hesitant hope of a child who had learned not to expect too much from adults. The first time she asked, her voice was barely a whisper. "Do you still tuck folks in where you come from?" The question pierced Elise's heart with its careful politeness, the way it was phrased to give her an easy excuse to refuse. This child had learned to protect herself from disappointment by making her needs seem optional, by never asking for more than she thought she might receive. No child should have to be that careful with hope, Elise thought fiercely. No child should have to make herself small, so adults won't be inconvenienced by her needs. Elise had smiled, then the first genuine smile to cross her features in months of grinding hardship. She smoothed the buffalo hair blanket under the girl's chin, with hands that were gentle despite their calluses, actions that felt as natural and necessary as breathing. "Sleep warm, little one. Tomorrow will take care of itself." The ritual grew more elaborate over the following nights. Stories whispered in the darkness, gentle hands checking that blankets were secure against the cold, whispered reassurances that tomorrow would bring new possibilities. For Elise, these moments awakened maternal instincts she had thought died with her miscarriages, while for Naelli, they provided the feminine comfort she had craved but never dared to ask for directly. "This is what I was meant for," Elise realized during one of these quiet interludes. "Not just cooking and cleaning and making myself useful, but this caring for a child who needs me being the soft place she can land when the world proves too hard." Chaveo observed these interactions without comment, his jaw tight with the constant vigilance of someone who understood that his primary duty was protection. He had been Nayeli's guardian since her mother's tragic death 10 years earlier, a responsibility he carried with the same intensity he had once brought to scouting enemy positions. The child wasn't his biological daughter, but Apache customs valued bonds of duty and care far deeper than mere genetics. "Ayanna, you would love this woman," he thought during one of his sleepless watches. She has your strength, your way of making people feel valued and cared for. Nayeli blooms around her like a flower, finding sunlight after a long winter. As days passed, he began to notice subtle changes in both the woman and the child. Elise's shoulders had straightened her movements, becoming more confident as regular meals restored her strength. But more than physical recovery, she carried herself with renewed purpose, as if caring for Naelli had reminded her of her own worth. Nayeli laughed more often, her serious little face lighting up with genuine joy whenever Elise praised her help around the cooking fire. The child's careful politeness was giving way to natural enthusiasm, her questions becoming bolder as she grew confident in the attention she received. There was something healing in their growing connection, something that reminded him why they fought so hard to preserve not just lives, but the possibility of hope itself. In this harsh country where survival consumed so much energy, it was easy to forget that human beings needed more than food and shelter. They needed love, purpose, the knowledge that their existence mattered to someone else. "Is this what you were trying to tell me, sister?" he wondered, remembering dreams in which Ayana seemed to speak to him across the veil of death. That healing comes not from forgetting our losses, but from finding new ways to love. 15 miles down the treacherous mountain road, Victor Ransom cursed the winter weather from behind the frost-covered window of his office above Copper Gulch's main street. His consolidated mining operation was hemorrhaging money with each day of cold weather, the shafts filling with groundwater faster than his expensive steam pumps could clear them. $43,000, he calculated for the 100th time, his pale eyes tracking columns of figures that grew more desperate with each passing day. "That's what I'm losing every week. This operation stays shut down. The investors back east won't tolerate much more delay before they start demanding explanations I can't give." The 42-year-old mine owner possessed the soft hands of someone who had climbed to power by giving orders rather than following them, and his pale eyes held the cold calculation of a man who saw the world in terms of assets and obstacles to be overcome. He had invested everything he owned and several things he didn't into the mining operation, and every day of delay brought him closer to complete financial ruin. "I should have listened to Sarah," he thought bitterly, remembering his late wife's warnings about overextending their finances. "She always said greed would be my downfall. But what choice did I have in this territory? You either grow or you die. There's no standing still when other men are clawing their way to the top." The water that kept his operation running also sustained the Apache camp at Willow Springs, and Victor had been watching that settlement for months, waiting for the perfect opportunity to claim those water rights through whatever means proved most expedient. In his mind, a handful of displaced Indians had no business controlling resources that could restore his fortunes and secure his future. They're squatters, he told himself, the same rationalization he'd used to justify previous land grabs. This is American territory now governed by American law. Property rights, mineral claims, water appropriation. These things have legal meaning. What they're doing up there is nothing but theft. But even as he constructed these justifications, a small voice in his conscience whispered uncomfortable truths. The Apache families weren't squatters. They'd been granted legal permission to winter there by territorial authorities. Their water use was minimal and seasonal, and their presence threatened his operation only because he'd overextended his resources, chasing profits that might never materialize. "Sentiment is a luxury I can't afford," he decided, pushing aside such inconvenient thoughts. "Business is business. In 5 years, when this operation is profitable and employing half the territory, no one will remember a handful of Indians who got in the way of progress." Sheriff Oscar Pike served as another tool in Victor's growing collection of purchased loyalties, a thick-set man with a jagged scar across his lower lip, and moral flexibility that came with elected office in a boom town where money talked louder than justice. Oscar understood clearly which side his bread was buttered on, and Victor Ransom controlled both the knife and the butter dish in their relationship. "The voters elected me to keep order and enforce the law," Oscar told himself whenever conscience intruded on his dealings with Victor. "And the law says Water rights belong to whoever can make best use of them. A mining operation that employs 300 men serves the public interest better than a few Indian families raising horses. It was a convenient fiction that let him sleep at night, though his dreams were often troubled by memories of his father, a man who'd worn a badge with genuine honor and died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Among Victor's other employees, Dr. Edwin Hartwell occupied a special position of trust and influence. The physician was a soft-spoken man in his early 40s, with prematurely gray hair that spoke of too many sleepless nights, tending to the wounded and dying. His steady hands had saved countless lives over the years, but they had failed to save the one that mattered most. His daughter Sarah had died the previous year in a mining accident, crushed when poorly maintained tunnel supports gave way during a school visit to one of the smaller operations. She had been only 11 years old, bright and curious with her whole life ahead of her when falling rocks ended that future in an instant. "Papa, look at all the pretty stones." The memory of her excited voice echoed through Dr. Edwin's mind at unexpected moments, carrying with it a pain so sharp it took his breath away. She was pointing at fool's gold embedded in the tunnel wall, her eyes bright with wonder at the underground world she'd never seen before. And then the timber groaned and the world ended. The girl's medical bills and funeral expenses had left Dr. Edwin drowning in debt, and Victor's offer to clear those obligations in exchange for certain favors had been both a lifeline and a temptation that preyed on his deepest vulnerabilities. What would Sarah think of what I've become? He wondered during the sleepless hours when guilt weighed heaviest on his conscience. She believed her papa was a hero, someone who helped people when they were hurt and scared. Would she understand why I'm helping a man who hurts people for profit? Dr. Edwin kept a small daguerreotype of Sarah on his desk, and sometimes Victor would catch him staring at it with eyes that held more pain than any man should have to bear. It was that pain Victor intended to exploit when the time came to secure the doctor's cooperation in claiming the water rights that would save them both from financial ruin. Everyone has their price. Victor reflected, studying the broken man across from his desk. For most people, it's money or comfort or security. But for the good doctor, it's the ghost of a little girl who believed he could fix anything that was broken. Even now, especially now, he'll do whatever he thinks will honor her memory, or at least atone for failing to save her. Near dawn on December 18th, when the temperature had dropped well below zero, and the wind carried ice crystals sharp enough to draw blood from exposed skin, and the peaceful silence of Willow Springs shattered under the thunder of hoofbeats, and the sharp crack of rifles fired more for intimidation than accuracy. 2 of Victor's hired guns thundered into the camp, whooping like demons escaped from hell's deepest pits, their horses snorting and dancing beneath riders who had fortified themselves with liquid courage before undertaking their mission. Greasy Pete, so named for his legendary aversion to soap and clean clothes, fired his rifle skyward while his mount pranced nervously beneath him. "This'll show 'em we mean business." Pete thought through the whiskey haze that made the world seem simpler and consequences more distant. A few shots in the air, some tough talk, and they'll pack up and move on like sensible folks. No need for anyone to get hurt if they're smart about it. "Y'all got 10 minutes to get out of here." He bellowed whiskey, slurring his words and making him sway dangerously in the saddle. "This here's American territory now, and you red devils ain't welcome no more." His partner, Rusty Joe, earned his nickname from the color of his unkempt beard and his tendency to leave tools and weapons uncleaned until they spotted with corrosion. He aimed his shots lower and more strategically, trying to spook the camp's horses into bolting toward the timber. A man afoot in winter weather was as good as dead in this country, and both raiders understood this basic frontier mathematics perfectly. Horses are easier to replace than people Joe reasoned his shots carefully placed to frighten rather than kill. Drive off their animals, and they'll have no choice but to walk out. No need for bloodshed if we're smart about this. But their smart plan began unraveling immediately. One of their wild shots snapped a critical lodgepole with a sound like breaking bones. The carefully balanced canvas structure collapsed like a wounded animal, its considerable weight dragging the heavy fabric inexorably toward the cooking fire that had been banked for safety, but still glowed with dangerous heat beneath its covering of ash. Fire. The terror that gripped every frontier settlement struck the camp like lightning. In this dry country where wooden structures and canvas shelters could vanish in minutes, fire meant death as surely as bullets or starvation. Fire brigade. Elise shouted without thinking, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority born of desperation and hard-won experience. In mining towns throughout the territory, fire was death incarnate. Everyone learned to respond with lightning speed or risk losing not just possessions, but lives to flames that could consume an entire settlement in minutes. The words came from muscle memory, from too many emergencies, in too many places, where split-second organization meant the difference between survival and catastrophe. Her hands moved without conscious thought, grabbing the nearest bucket, while her mind calculated water sources, wind direction, and escape routes with the automatic precision of someone who had faced this terror before. Chaveo thrust his prized Winchester into the capable hands of Walter Sims, a poor white settler in his 30s, who had chosen to winter near the Apache camp, rather than face the crushing isolation of trying to survive alone in the high country. Walter's weathered face showed the particular gauntness of chronic poverty, but his steady gray eyes marked him as utterly reliable when situations turned desperate. Some people break under pressure. Chaveo reflected, seeing Walter's immediate understanding of what needed to be done. Others discover strength they never knew they possessed. This man has both the will and the skill to use that rifle if necessary. Without hesitation, Chaveo plunged into the smoke-filled ruins of the collapsed lodge, the acrid stench of burning canvas and cured hide filling his nostrils as he fought his way through debris that seemed determined to trap him. The air was thick enough to cut with a knife, and he could hear Grandmother Ayana's weak coughing somewhere in the maze of fallen support beams and tangled fabric. Not another Ayana, he thought fiercely, his sister's name shared by the elderly woman who served as the camp's keeper of stories and traditions. I won't lose another woman to fire and violence. Not while there's strength in my body to prevent it. Heat pressed against his back like a living thing, and smoke burned his lungs with each gasping breath. But his hands found the familiar shape of human shoulders, and he grabbed the elderly woman under both arms, hauling her bodily through the wreckage, while fallen timbers shifted ominously around them. Meanwhile, Elise had launched herself at the spreading fire with desperate determination, hurling armload after armload of snow onto the hungry orange tongues that licked eagerly at everything combustible within reach. Each shovelful bought them precious seconds, but the flames were spreading faster than any one person could work alone. More hands. She thought frantically, her mind cataloging everything that could burn and everything that could stop the burning. Need more hands, more water, more time. But we work with what we have, not what we wish we had. The air filled with a mixture of scents that told the story of their battle. The clean smell of melting snow, and the harsh bite of wood smoke, the earthy aroma of damp soil exposed beneath the white blanket, and underlying it all the charred stench of materials never meant to burn. Steam rose in thick clouds from her efforts, creating a fog that made it even harder to see what was happening around them. Naelli appeared at her elbow, like a small guardian angel carrying a tin pail of creek water that sloshed with each hurried step. The child's face was streaked with tears and black soot, but her small hands remained steady as she passed the bucket to Elise without being asked. Brave girl, Elise thought with fierce pride, accepting the water and dumping it precisely where it would do the most good. She's scared, but she's here. She's helping. That's what real courage looks like, not the absence of fear, but acting despite it. Gunshots continued to ricochet off the granite outcroppings that surrounded their valley, filling the morning air with the deadly whine of bullets and the sharp crack of lead striking stone. Each shot seemed to echo and re-echo from the canyon walls, creating a symphony of violence. that made it impossible to tell exactly where the danger was coming from. Walter Sims crouched behind a fallen log, the Winchester steady in his experienced hands, as he tracked the raiders' movements through the organized chaos of the fire brigade. "Never thought I'd be shooting at white men to protect Apache families," he reflected with dark humor. "But then, I never thought white men would be burning out families with children either. Sometimes the lines aren't as clear as we pretend they are." Chaveo dropped to one knee in the snow and brought his recovered rifle to his shoulder with practiced smoothness. His breathing slowed automatically as he sighted down the barrel, his finger finding the trigger with the precision of someone who had performed this deadly action thousands of times under fire. Ayanna, he thought, invoking his sister's memory, as he had during every battle since her death. "Guide my hand. Let justice be served, but let mercy temper it where possible." His first shot was carefully calculated, designed to disable rather than kill if possible. The bullet struck the ornate silver-chased horn of Greasy Pete's expensive saddle, sending up a spray of leather fragments and bent metal that sparkled in the morning sunlight. The horse, already nervous from the noise and gunfire, reared up on its hind legs with a terrified whinny and then bolted toward the tree line, carrying its cursing rider at a pace that would have been comical under different circumstances. Fear is often more effective than death, Chaveo observed with grim satisfaction. A dead man inspires others to revenge. A humiliated man inspires them to caution. Rusty Joe, seeing his partner's predicament and realizing their surprise attack had gone badly wrong, swung his rifle toward Chaveo and fired without taking proper aim. His bullet clipped the Apache warrior's upper arm, tearing through the heavy fabric of his winter coat and leaving a bloody furrow in the muscle beneath that burned like liquid fire. The wound was painful but not immediately dangerous, and Chaveo barely flinched as he worked the lever action and sought another target through the drifting smoke. Blood seeped through his coat sleeve, but his hands remained steady and his aim true. Pain is information. He reminded himself a lesson learned during his years as an Army Scout. It tells you what's wrong, but it doesn't have to control what you do about it. The two attackers, finally realizing that their surprise assault had failed catastrophically and that they were facing organized resistance from people who knew how to shoot back with deadly accuracy, began a hasty retreat toward the protective cover of the dense timber. "Sheriff's coming with legal papers," Greasy Pete yelled over his shoulder as he finally regained control of his spooked mount, his voice cracking with embarrassment and residual fear. "Y'all best be long gone when he gets here, or you'll be looking at the inside of a territorial prison." The threat hung in the frigid air like gun smoke as the two men vanished into the maze of pine and aspen. The camp's defenders stood in the aftermath of violence, breathing hard, while flames continued to smolder ominously in what remained of the ruined lodge. "They'll be back," Chaveo thought grimly, pressing a handful of snow against his wounded arm to slow the bleeding. This was just the opening move. Whatever Victor Ransom is planning, it's bigger than harassment and intimidation. But for now, they had more immediate concerns. The fire was contained, but not extinguished. Grandmother Ayanna needed medical attention for smoke inhalation, and the destroyed lodge meant one family would need new shelter before the next storm arrived. Within an hour, the sound of a single horse approaching at a measured pace announced the arrival of Dr. Edwin Hartwell. He rode into their camp with the unhurried competence of someone long accustomed to dealing with medical emergencies in remote frontier locations, though his eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of recent sleepless nights and moral struggles. Sarah would have loved this place, he thought, studying the well-organized camp and the way adults and children worked together with easy cooperation. She always said people were more important than profits, that taking care of each other was what made us human instead of just clever animals. "Word travels fast in these mountains," he said, dismounting and tying his horse to a convenient tree. "Heard there was trouble up this way, figured you folks might need some medical attention." The kindness in his voice was genuine, but Elise detected something else, a careful quality that suggested he was walking a line between personal conscience and competing loyalties. Still, his medical bag was well stocked, and his hands were gentle as he began examining injuries. He set down his worn black medical bag with practiced efficiency and immediately began examining Chaveo's wounded arm, his skilled fingers probing the injury with gentle but thorough attention. "Bullet just grazed you, but we need to clean it proper to prevent infection," Dr. Edwin said, using his knife to cut away the blood-soaked fabric. He worked with careful precision, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Chaveo's jaw tighten despite his stoic demeanor, then stitching the torn flesh with surgical thread. These are good people, he reflected as he worked, watching the way the camp had rallied to help each other, despite the morning's violence. They don't deserve what Victor has planned for them. But what choice do I have? Sarah's debts won't disappear, and without Victor's help, I'll lose everything I've worked to build. As he packed his instruments away, Dr. Edwin shared information that transformed the morning's violence from random brutality into something far more ominous. The words came reluctantly, forced out by conscience that warred with self-preservation. "Victor Ransom's been mighty busy down in Copper Gulch," he said, his voice carrying grave weight. "Filed papers with the territorial court claiming water rights to this entire valley under prior appropriation law." Elise felt the blood drain from her face as the implications hit her like a physical blow. The cedar chest, which had been merely a burden and a mystery, suddenly became something far more dangerous, a potential weapon in legal warfare she didn't understand. "He's waving around some kind of agreement that he claims your late husband signed." Dr. Edwin continued, addressing her directly with gentle but troubled eyes. "Says it gives him legal authority over the entire creek system." Emmett, she thought desperately. What did you do? What agreements did you make? What consequences am I inheriting along with your secrets? The suggestion that Emmett's mysterious past might somehow threaten these people who had shown her such kindness created a knot of anxiety in her chest. She had known that her husband had worked for various mining operations, but he had never mentioned signing any agreements affecting water rights. But then he never mentioned many things, she admitted to herself. His past was a closed book, and every time I tried to read it, he'd smile and change the subject. "What else don't I know? What other surprises did you leave for me to discover?" What Dr. Edwin didn't reveal was the conversation he'd had with Victor the previous evening. The mine owner had made his offer explicit, ensure that any legal documents the Apache camp might produce never reached Judge Morrison's court, and Sarah's debts would disappear completely. The photograph of his dead daughter seemed to burn in Dr. Edwin's coat pocket, a constant reminder of his failure to save the one person who had mattered most. "Papa, you can fix anything that's broken, can't you?" Sarah's trusting voice echoed in his memory, accompanied by the weight of promises he'd made and failed to keep. "But some things can't be fixed, sweetheart. Some choices once made can't be undone. If there's documentation in that chest," the doctor added, nodding toward the cedar box, "it might be your only legal shield. Victor's got money and influence, but law still means something if you've got the right papers." Elisa's hand moved instinctively to the thong around her neck, feeling the key's familiar weight like an anchor. For months, she had avoided opening the chest, paralyzed by fear of what secrets it might contain. Now circumstances made delay impossible. "Whatever you hid from me, Emmett," she decided with grim determination, "it's time for the truth to come out. These people deserve to know what they're facing, and I deserve to know what kind of man I married." After Dr. Edwin departed with promises to return if his services were needed again, the camp settled into the tense routine of people preparing for siege. Weapons were cleaned and checked. Food stores were inventoried and rationed more carefully, and scouts were posted to watch the approaches to their valley. To reach the trading post before Sheriff Oscar could establish roadblocks, they would need to move fast through terrain that grew more treacherous with each storm. The temperature had plummeted overnight, creating deceptive ice crusts over snow that would support a man's weight in some places while collapsing treacherously in others. Winter's the real enemy, Chaveo reflected, as he studied the sky for signs of approaching weather. Victor thinks he's controlling the timing, but nature makes the ultimate decisions in this country. One blizzard could trap us here for weeks, or give us cover to move without being seen. Chaveo insisted on leading despite his wounded arm, which he kept bound tight against his body. Alongside him rode Nayeli and 2 pack horses loaded with furs and handmade goods they hoped to trade for essential supplies. The trail wound beside the frozen creek, through stands of pine and bare aspen, whose skeletal branches created intricate shadow patterns against the gray December sky. What should have been an hour's easy ride in summer required 3 times as long in current conditions, with every step tested and each stream crossing approached with extreme caution. This country kills the careless, Chaveo thought, reading signs in the landscape that spoke of hidden dangers. Ice that looks solid, snow that conceals sudden drops, weather that can change from calm to deadly in minutes. Survival here demands constant respect for forces beyond human control. Wolves paced them along the ridge, their mournful howls echoing off canyon walls in ancient chorus. The pack animals sensed predators with prey species instinct, rolling their eyes and moving with nervous energy that spoke of creatures being constantly evaluated as potential meals. Different kind of wolves than the ones that hunt in town, Elise observed, studying the gray shapes that flowed through the timber, like shadows given life. These ones are honest about what they are. They kill to eat, not for profit or pleasure or the satisfaction of power over others. Halfway across what appeared to be solid ice covering a wider pool, the surface beneath them began groaning and cracking like distant gunshots. Here, an old beaver dam had once backed up deeper water, and the ice overstanding pools was treacherously thin despite solid appearance. No, Chaveo thought, recognizing the warning signs too late to turn back. Not here, not now, not with Naelli. Chaveo felt the surface give way beneath his horse's hooves with sickening lurch. In the split second before disaster, he threw himself sideways, grabbing Nayeli by her heavy coat as her smaller pony broke through and began sliding toward the black seam of open water marking the creek's main channel. Time seemed to slow as they fell, the world becoming a nightmare of icy water and desperate thrashing. The shock of immersion drove breath from his lungs in explosive gasps, but his grip on Naelli never loosened. "Hold on," he commanded silently, feeling the child's small body shaking with cold and terror. "Hold on, little one. I won't let the water take you like it took your grandmother." The shock sent both horses and riders sprawling across treacherous ice, while heavily loaded pack animals scrambled backward with desperate whinnies, sensing mortal danger. Nayeli clung to Chaveo's coat with small hands, shaking from cold and terror, while he fought to keep them both from sliding into water that would mean death within minutes. "Can't feel my legs," he realized with detached clarity that came with extreme crisis. "Water's too cold. Got maybe 2 minutes before my muscles stop working entirely. Need help? Need it now." The ice gave way entirely. They plunged through with gasps of shock as water so cold it drove breath from their lungs closed over their heads. For a terrifying moment, Elise watched them disappear beneath the black surface, certain she was witnessing their deaths. Not again, she thought fiercely, memories of helplessness during Emmett's final moments driving her to action. "I won't stand by and watch someone else die when I could have acted. Not this time." Chaveo's head broke the surface first, his arm locked around Naelli as both struggled against current and numbing cold. The child's lips were already turning blue, her body going limp as hypothermia began its deadly work. "Stay with me." He willed her, fighting against the current that sought to sweep them downstream toward deeper water and certain death. "Stay awake, stay fighting. Your mother's spirit watches over you, but she needs you to help yourself." Elise yanked her lasso from the saddle and threw it with desperate strength, born of absolute necessity. The braided rope sailed through frigid air, landing within Chaveo's reach just as the current tried to sweep them downstream. He managed to loop it around his good arm, while Walter wrapped the other end around a sturdy pine and braced himself. Leverage and technique. Walter thought, his mind automatically calculating angles and forces, while his body strained against the rope. Played tug of war as a kid, but never with stakes like these. Hold fast, tree. Hold fast, rope. Hold fast, everyone who's depending on getting this right. The next minutes became a desperate struggle against cold current and growing numbness that threatened to steal strength from their limbs. With Walter anchoring and Elise pulling from stable ice, they hauled both victims to safety, though all were soaked and shaking with cold that went beyond mere discomfort. Alive, Elise thought with relief so profound it made her knees weak. They're alive. Blue around the lips and shaking like leaves, but alive. That's what matters. Everything else can be dealt with. By the time they reached the trading post, wet clothes had stiffened with ice, and their breath came in painful gasps. The log building's glowing windows promised warmth and safety, the most beautiful sight Elise had ever seen. Civilization, she mused, studying the sturdy structure that represented safety and human cooperation in a landscape that showed little mercy to the unprepared. Not the grand kind with theaters and gaslights, but the kind that matters people working together to survive and help each other thrive. Inside, Beatrice Coleman, the local schoolteacher, a practical woman in her 30s, with kind eyes and work-hardened hands, helped them out of frozen garments with efficient sympathy. "Lord have mercy, you folks look like you've been through hell itself," she said, already moving them toward the fire. "Get warm before you catch your death." Takes one to know one, Beatrice thought, recognizing the signs of people who had pushed beyond normal endurance in pursuit of something vital. I've seen that look before, desperate folks who've risked everything because they had no choice. Usually they're running from something. Sometimes they're running towards something better. The bartering session was conducted with quiet efficiency by people who understood time was precious. The camp's expertly prepared furs exchanged for flour salt coffee and other essentials that would help them survive winter's remainder. Fair trades, Beatrice noted approvingly, watching the careful negotiations. These people understand value and quality. They're not trying to cheat anyone, just trying to get what they need to survive. I can respect that. As they loaded purchases, Beatrice drew Elise aside with urgent whisper, her eyes darting toward frost-covered windows, as if enemies might be watching from the surrounding forest. "Oscar Pike's been through twice today, asking questions and posting notices," she said, glancing nervously toward frost-covered windows. "Claims he's got papers from Judge Morrison himself, though I've got my doubts about anything that man touches." Her voice dropped lower. "There's a root cellar beneath the schoolhouse. You can hide there if needed. I'll tell them I haven't seen anyone matching your descriptions." Her offer came from genuine conviction rather than mere sympathy. Beatrice had witnessed Victor's increasingly aggressive expansion attempts and understood that if men like him operated without constraint, no one would be safe. Power without conscience is tyranny. She reflected, remembering her father's teachings about civic duty and moral courage. And tyranny thrives when good people decide it's not their problem. Well, I'm making it my problem. The root cellar proved cramped, but secure, a stone-lined space beneath the schoolhouse floor, accessible through a hidden trap door under a heavy desk. They'd barely settled into uncomfortable refuge when multiple horses announced Oscar's arrival. Like animals hiding from hunters, Elise thought with dark irony, listening to booted feet moving overhead. Except the hunters are supposed to be lawmen, and we're supposed to be citizens with rights. But rights only matter when someone with power chooses to respect them. Through cracks between floorboards, they saw boots moving overhead as the search party conducted investigation with the thoroughness of men who were being paid to be thorough. "Schoolteacher." Oscar's muffled voice carried down, heavy with lazy confidence of someone believing authority was absolute. "I'm looking for an Apache brave and white woman traveling with a girl. They would have passed through in the last few hours, probably trading for supplies." His tone held the casual arrogance of someone who had never been seriously challenged, who assumed compliance as his natural due. It was the voice of a man who had forgotten that badges were supposed to serve justice, not personal profit. Beatrice's response was steady and convincing. "I've been preparing lessons all morning, Sheriff. Haven't seen hide nor hair of anyone matching those descriptions." Truth carefully selected, she thought, pride mixing with nervousness. "I have been preparing lessons. I haven't seen hide nor hair of anyone matching those exact descriptions because what I've seen are people trying to protect their family and community from legal manipulation." The search continued nearly an hour, with posse members checking every corner and storage area with systematic thoroughness. Finally, apparently satisfied their quarry had either not come this way or moved on, Oscar ordered them mounted to continue elsewhere. Patience, Chaveo counseled himself, feeling Nayeli's small hand slip into his as they waited in darkness. Patience and careful timing. Rush now, and we risk everything. Wait too long, and the opportunity passes. Wisdom lies in knowing when to act. Only after hoofbeats faded completely did Beatrice lift the trap door. Relief was evident on her weathered face as she helped them emerge from their hiding place. They're heading north toward the main road, she reported, brushing dust from her skirts. "If you're returning to camp, take the long way through high timber. Stay off established trails. Oscar's got men watching regular routes." "Good advice," Chaveo acknowledged silently, already calculating alternate paths that would keep them clear of potential ambushes. This woman understands tactics and timing. She'd make a good scout if she ever tired of teaching children. But as they prepared to leave, circumstances forced a revelation that would change everything. Sheriff Oscar had left behind a deputy who'd been watching the schoolhouse from concealment. And now he burst through the door with drawn gun and nervous eyes that darted between the adults. "Drop your weapons and step away from that chest." Deputy Morrison commanded, his voice cracking slightly with fear and inexperience. "Mr. Ransom wants to see what's in that box, and he's willing to pay good money for a look." Young and scared, Elise assessed, studying the deputy's shaking hands and wide eyes. Probably never drawn his gun on anyone before. That makes him dangerous. Scared people do stupid things, and stupid things get people killed. Trapped with no escape route and Naelli's safety at stake, Elise felt the crushing weight of impossible choices. The key around her neck seemed to burn against her skin as she realized that the moment she had dreaded for months had finally arrived. "Time to face whatever truth you left me, Emmett," she decided with grim finality. "Time to stop running from secrets and start dealing with consequences. You want to see what's in here?" She said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Fine. But I'm warning you, some secrets are better left buried." The lantern light flickered across tarnished brass hinges as she finally inserted the key with trembling fingers. The unused lock resisted briefly before yielding with a soft click that seemed to echo through the schoolhouse like gunshot. Whatever comes next, she thought, at least I'll finally know the truth. At least these people who've shown me kindness will understand what they're really dealing with. Inside, arranged with careful precision, lay remnants of a life she had never known. A modest trousseau spoke of domestic hopes only partially fulfilled. A leather-bound prayer book with pages worn soft suggested spiritual depths to Emmett she'd rarely witnessed. Who were you, really? She wondered, studying items that belonged to a stranger who happened to share her husband's name. What life were you living before you met me? What dreams were you chasing or running from? But it was the packet wrapped in oiled cloth that drew everyone's attention. When she broke the wax seal and spread the papers in wavering light, the story they told would shatter everything she thought she knew about her husband and her new family. The deed was written in Emmett's careful handwriting, each word formed with legal precision that spoke of someone who understood the importance of documentation in territorial law. But it was the accompanying letter that hit her like hammer blows, each revelation more devastating than the last. "I confess before God that I had intimate relations with an Apache woman named Ayanna during my early mining days." The letter began, the formal language barely containing the emotional weight of the admission. "Our daughter Nayeli was born from that union in the spring of 1879. I have loved that child from the moment I first held her, though I lacked the courage to claim her openly. Nayeli is his daughter. And the realization struck Elise like lightning, illuminating connections she had never suspected. That's why she felt so familiar, why caring for her seemed so natural. She's my stepdaughter, Emmett's child. Elise's legs nearly gave out as the implications crashed over her. Naelli, the child she had come to love as her own, was Emmett's daughter, her stepdaughter. The bonds she had felt forming were not coincidence, but recognition of family ties she had never known existed. But the worst was yet to come. I bear witness to the burning of Ayana's winter lodge at Willow Springs by men under my direct supervision, an act of violence that I ordered in a moment of jealous rage when I discovered she had taken another lover. The fire was meant only to frighten her into leaving with me, but it spread faster than we anticipated. Ayana died in the flames while trying to save her belongings, and I watched the woman I loved burn to death because of my jealousy and pride. Murder, the word echoed in Elise's mind with sickening finality. Not accident or misfortune or tragic circumstance. Murder planned and executed by the man I thought I knew, the man I married, the man whose child I've been caring for without knowing the truth. The confession continued in increasingly erratic handwriting. I killed the mother of my child out of spite and jealousy, then lacked the courage to claim the daughter I had orphaned. Instead, I fled like a coward and tried to build a new life on the foundation of my crimes. Chaveo had gone very still, his dark eyes fixed on Elise with an expression she couldn't read, but that made her stomach clench with dread. The deputy, confused by the legal language, but sensing its importance, grabbed for the papers with eager hands. "That'll be enough reading," he said nervously, his voice cracking with excitement and fear. "Mr. Ransom will want to see these documents himself." But Chaveo moved with lightning speed that belied his wounded arm, disarming the deputy and pinning him against the wall before the man could react. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of 10 years of suppressed grief and rage. "So," he said quietly, his gaze never leaving Elise's face, each word carefully controlled despite the emotion burning behind his eyes. "Now, we know the truth about your husband, the man who murdered my sister and orphaned her child." His sister Elise realized with horror that compounded upon horror. Ayana was his sister. Emmett killed Chaveo's sister and orphaned the child that Chaveo has been raising. And I've been living among them, accepting their kindness, loving Nayeli, without knowing. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the soft crackle of the lantern and the deputy's labored breathing. Nayeli, too young to fully understand the legal language, but sensing the adult's distress, moved closer to Elise, with the instinctive trust of a child seeking comfort. She doesn't know, Elise realized, looking down at the child whose world was about to be shattered by truths she was too young to process. She doesn't understand what this means, what it changes. But she will eventually. And when she does, I didn't know. Elise whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks as the weight of inherited guilt crushed down upon her. "I swear to you, I didn't know any of this. If I had, if you had known, would you have come here?" Chaveo asked, his voice still deadly quiet, but containing currents of emotion that ran deeper than mere anger. "Would you have let us take you and feed, you care for you while carrying the secret of who killed Naeli's mother?" The question hung between them, like a blade sharp with accusation and challenge. But as Elise looked into his eyes, she saw something beyond rage, pain, loss, the terrible burden of caring for a child whose parentage connected him to the worst tragedy of his life. "I would have brought the papers anyway," Elise said, finding strength she didn't know she possessed, her voice growing firmer with each word. "Because what Emmett did was wrong, but what he tried to do afterward, giving Naelli her inheritance, ensuring she had legal protection, that was right. And you?" She looked directly into his eyes, meeting his gaze without flinching. You raised his daughter with more love and honor than he ever showed her. She deserves everything these papers can give her. Truth, she thought with grim clarity. Sometimes the only way forward is through absolute honesty, no matter how much it hurts. The remainder of Emmett's letter detailed his desperate attempt at amends. I cannot continue to draw breath under the crushing weight of this knowledge. Without taking action to provide for the child I have wronged so terribly. Therefore, I hereby convey my legal claim to Willow Springs, including all water sources, mineral rights, and improvements, to my daughter Nayeli Carter, to be held in trust until she reaches legal majority under the guardianship of Chaveo, her mother's kinsman and the most honorable man I have ever known. At least you got one thing right? Elise thought bitterly, studying the legal language that represented Emmett's attempt at posthumous redemption. You recognized Chaveo's worth, even if you lacked the courage to face him while you were alive. All the documents bore dates from 11 years earlier, carrying court clerk Laurent's official seal. The notarization was genuine, and the legal language was precise enough for any territorial court that still believed in law over money's influence. Chaveo studied the papers with the careful attention of someone who understood their implications perfectly. After several long minutes of tense silence, he looked up at Elise with something approaching respect in his dark eyes. She could have hidden this, he realized, watching her face as she absorbed the full weight of her husband's crimes. Could have destroyed the evidence, protected his memory, saved herself from this pain. But she chose truth over comfort, justice over convenience. That takes courage. Your husband was a coward and a murderer. He said simply, his words carrying no malice, now only statement of fact. But these papers, they give Naelli legal protection that could save all our lives. The question is, what do you intend to do with them? Whatever it takes to see justice done. Elise replied without hesitation, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. For Naelli, for your people, and yes, for Emmett too. Maybe the only way he can find peace is if his daughter gets what's rightfully hers. The sins of the husband don't transfer to the wife. Chaveo thought, studying this woman who had chosen courage when easier paths lay before her, and sometimes redemption comes through unexpected hands. Their conversation was interrupted by the thunder of approaching hooves and shouted commands that spoke of men who no longer felt the need for subtlety. Victor Ransom himself appeared in the schoolhouse doorway, flanked by armed men, including Quiet Will, whose expression had grown increasingly troubled as he witnessed his employer's escalating brutality. Well, well, Victor said, his pale eyes glittering with satisfaction as he took in the scene, the opened chest, the scattered papers, the deputy's embarrassed stance. Looks like we've found what we were looking for. I'll take those papers now if you don't mind. And if we do mind. Elise thought, studying the men behind Victor and calculating odds that looked grimmer by the second. 6 armed men against a wounded Apache warrior, a schoolteacher, a woman, and a child. Not exactly favorable numbers, but Quiet Will had been watching and listening, and something in the conversation had triggered memories of his own sister's death in Victor's poorly maintained mind. The casual way Victor talked about destroying families, about taking a child's inheritance for profit, finally pushed him past his breaking point. Mary always said there was good in everyone, he reflected, remembering his sister's faith in human decency. But she died because men like Victor value money more than safety, profits more than people. How many more will die if I keep helping him? Actually, Mr. Ransom, he said quietly, stepping away from Victor's group and placing his hand on his gun. I think these folks have been through enough. Maybe it's time you found a different line of work. Victor's face flushed with rage as his careful plans began crumbling around him. You're firing yourself, Will. After all I've paid you, I'm firing myself from being part of this. Will replied calmly, his hand steady on his weapon. Some things are more important than money, and protecting children from men like you is one of them. Too many children have died because of cowardice disguised as practicality. He thought feeling a weight lift from his conscience. Mary's death, this man's daughter Sarah, all the others who suffered because good people chose safety over justice. The standoff that followed was brief but decisive. Victor's remaining men, seeing which way the wind was blowing and unwilling to face Quiet Will's legendary gunfighting skills, began backing toward the door with nervous glances at their employer. Hired loyalty only goes so deep, Chaveo observed, watching the dissolution of Victor's support. When the price gets too high, most people discover they have limits after all. Victor himself, faced with the collapse of his support and the ruin of his plans, made one last desperate grab for the papers that represented his salvation from financial ruin. Elise stepped between him and the documents, her kitchen knife appearing in her hand with practiced ease. The blade gleamed in the lantern light, steady despite the trembling in her arms. "You want these papers?" she said, her voice steady as granite, despite the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "You'll have to go through me first." Victor sneered, drawing his own weapon, a fancy derringer that spoke more of show than substance. "One widow against a businessman with proper backing, I like those odds." Proper backing, Elise thought with bitter humor, glancing at the men who were already halfway out the door. "Your backing just walked away, and you're too arrogant to notice." But he had badly underestimated both Elise's desperation and her skills. When he lunged forward, she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had spent years working with sharp blades in close quarters. Her knife found its mark between his ribs, sliding up under the sternum with surgical precision that spoke of intimate knowledge of butchering and anatomy. "This is for every widow you've made," she thought as the blade went home. "Every family destroyed, every child orphaned by your greed." Victor's eyes widened in shock and disbelief as he realized he was dying, his carefully crafted plans dissolving along with his life. This isn't how it was supposed to end." He gasped, blood frothing at his lips as he collapsed. "No." Elise agreed quietly, stepping back as he felt her knife still stained with his blood. "It was supposed to end with you in prison for what you've done. But sometimes justice takes its own path. And sometimes," she added silently, "justice wears the face of a desperate woman who's had enough of watching powerful men destroy innocent lives." The aftermath of Victor's death moved swiftly. Deputy U.S. Marshal Tom Harrison arrived from Sable Junction, having been summoned by telegraph, when reports of the violence reached territorial authorities. The legal proceedings that followed were surprisingly straightforward. Victor's crimes were well documented, and his death during an attempt to steal legal documents from their rightful owner was ruled justifiable homicide. The law still works sometimes, Marshal Harrison reflected, studying the evidence and witness statements. Not as often as it should, but when it does, it tends to be decisive. This Victor Ransom was exactly the kind of man who gives business a bad name. Judge Morrison formally recorded Nayeli as the legal holder of all water rights to Willow Springs, with Chaveo continuing as her guardian, and Elise added as co-trustee. The court order was carefully crafted to prevent future challenges and establish clear precedent for Native American property rights. "Justice delayed isn't always justice denied," Judge Morrison mused as he signed the documents. "Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances and the right people to set things straight. This child will never want for legal protection again." Sheriff Oscar Pike was removed from office and charged with corruption, while Beatrice Coleman was officially commended for her assistance to the territorial authorities. The investigation that followed revealed a web of illegal activities that had been flourishing under Oscar's protection. "Power without accountability breeds corruption," Marshal Harrison noted in his official report. "The citizens of Copper Gulch deserve better than what they've been getting. The new sheriff will understand that his job is serving justice, not serving the highest bidder." Dr. Edwin, freed from Victor's financial pressure and his own guilt over nearly betraying his principles, threw himself into providing medical care for the entire community with renewed dedication. Sarah would be proud, he thought, treating patients who couldn't pay with the same careful attention he gave to those who could. She always said healing was about more than money, about making people's lives better, regardless of what they could afford. I lost sight of that for a while, but I won't forget again. Walter Sims's 2 young sons were adopted into the Apache camp, where they would be raised according to traditions that valued children as the precious future of the community. The written compact Judge Morrison helped draft provided framework for sharing water resources during droughts and other emergencies. Different backgrounds, same needs, Walter observed, watching his boys learn Apache words alongside English ones. Children need love and guidance, and the knowledge that they matter. The color of the hands providing those things isn't nearly as important as the love in the hearts behind them. But it was on a quiet evening in late March, when the first spring snow was melting and the sound of running water promised winter's end, that the most important healing took place. As Elise tucked Nayeli into her bedroll, with gentle hands, she knew the time had come to address the truth that had been revealed in that schoolhouse. She deserves to know, Elise had decided after weeks of careful thought. Not all of it, not the brutal details, but enough to understand where she came from and why the papers matter. Truth shared with love is different from truth delivered as a weapon. Nayeli, she said softly, sitting beside the child's sleeping place. Do you understand what those papers meant about your father, your birth father? The child nodded solemnly, her dark eyes serious in the lamplight. He was your husband. And he hurt my first mama. Yes. Elise said, her voice thick with emotion, as she chose her words carefully. He did terrible things because he was jealous and angry. He made choices that caused great pain, and people died because of those choices. But he also tried to make it right by making sure you would be provided for. And you know what? What? Nayeli whispered, her small hand finding Elise's larger one. None of that changes how much I love you. Elise said fiercely, pulling the child into an embrace that conveyed years of suppressed maternal longing. You're my daughter now, in every way that matters. Legal papers made it official, but my heart made it real long before that. This is what love looks like, she thought, feeling Nayeli's small arms wrap around her neck. Not perfect people making perfect choices, but broken people choosing to care for each other, despite the mess they've inherited. Tears flowed freely down Elise's cheeks as she pulled the child into a fierce embrace. I love you, Naelli Carter. Not because you're Emmett's daughter, but because you're you, brave and kind and wonderful, and the best thing that ever happened to me. From the lodge doorway, Chaveo watched this reunion with his own eyes, bright with unshed tears. When Elise looked up at him questioningly, he stepped forward and placed gentle hands on both their shoulders. Ayana, he thought, feeling his sister's presence in the warm air that carried scents of melting snow and new growth. This is how healing happens. Not by forgetting our losses, but by finding new ways to love. Your birth father made terrible mistakes that caused great pain. He said to Naelli, his voice thick with emotion, as he chose his words with the same care Elise had shown. He let jealousy and pride turn him into someone cruel and destructive. But his final act was one of love and justice, ensuring you would be cared for, and that some measure of fairness would be done. He paused, gathering his thoughts and choosing his words with the precision of someone who understood that this moment would shape a child's understanding of herself and the world around her. I can forgive him for that final choice. He continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. And I hope that someday, when you're older and able to understand the full complexity of human nature, you'll be able to forgive him too. Not because what he did was right, but because forgiveness is sometimes the only way to break the cycle of pain and hatred. Wisdom earned through suffering, he reflected, feeling the weight of years spent choosing mercy over vengeance. The hardest lesson to learn, but the most important one to teach. The three of them held each other in the warm lamplight, a family forged not by blood alone, but by choice, sacrifice, and love that had grown from tragedy's seeds into something beautiful and enduring. Around them, the lodge held the accumulated warmth of countless evenings spent in each other's company, countless small acts of care and kindness that had built trust where none had existed before. Outside their lodge, the sounds of camp settling into evening routine provided comforting backdrop. Horses nickered softly in their corral cooking fires, sent aromatic smoke into the clear mountain air. And Willow Creek ran free and unobstructed, carrying with it the promise of life renewed. Spring will come, Elise thought, listening to the water's eternal song. Winter always ends, no matter how harsh or long. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, it leaves us stronger than we were before. Dr. Edwin had found peace in his work, his daughter's memory now honored by his service to the living, rather than haunted by guilt over debts and moral compromise. Each patient he treated, each life he saved, or suffering he eased, felt like a prayer of gratitude for the chance to serve something larger than his own pain. "Thank you, Sarah," he thought during his evening prayers. "Thank you for showing me what really matters. I won't forget again." Quiet Will had drifted on to other territories, but not before ensuring that Nayeli's legal protections were ironclad, and that word of Victor's fate would discourage other would-be claim jumpers. His last act before leaving had been to visit his sister's grave and tell her about choosing courage over profit. "You were right, Mary," he had whispered to the simple wooden cross that marked her resting place. "There is good in everyone. Sometimes it just takes the right moment to bring it out." Beatrice's school had become a symbol of cooperation between communities, where Apache and white children learned together, building friendships that might prevent future conflicts. Her classroom rang with laughter and the sound of young voices discovering that knowledge was the greatest wealth anyone could possess. "Education is revolution," she reflected, watching children of different backgrounds work together on their lessons. Not the violent kind that destroys, but the quiet kind that builds understanding and breaks down the walls between different peoples. The Water Compact had become a model for resource sharing throughout the territory, proving that communities could prosper together rather than fighting over scarce resources. Other settlements began sending delegations to study their methods and learn from their success. Cooperation instead of competition, Chaveo noted with satisfaction, watching the fruits of their hard-won peace. Strange how much more everyone has when they stop trying to take everything from each other. As spring advanced and the first wildflowers began blooming in the high meadows, the people of Willow Springs looked toward a future that seemed brighter than any they had dared imagine during the dark days of winter. They had proven that families could be formed by choice as powerfully as by birth, that justice could prevail when good people stood together, and that love could triumph over the legacy of past mistakes. "We've built something that will last," Elise thought, watching Nayeli play with other children beside the creek that bore their family's name. "Not just for us, but for generations to come. That's what real wealth looks like, not gold or silver, but the knowledge that your children will be safe and loved." When Nayeli asked, as she did every night, "Can you tuck me in too?" Elisa's answer came with all the certainty of someone who had found her true home and purpose. "Yes, little one. Now and always and forever, yes." The wind that whispered through the pines that night carried the sweet sense of melting snow and new growth, the promise of seasons turning and life continuing. It stirred the canvas walls and dying embers of their fire, but it no longer carried threats or uncertainty. Change and continuity. Chaveo reflected, feeling the eternal rhythms of the natural world. Some things must change so that other things can remain. The face of the land changes with the seasons, but the land itself endures. Our family has changed, but love endures. The people of Willow Springs had faced winter's worst and human greed's cruelest manifestations, emerging not merely as survivors, but as a community strengthened by shared struggle and united by love that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. They had built something lasting from tragedy's ashes, proven that hope could flourish even in the harshest ground, and demonstrated that sometimes the greatest victories came not from conquering enemies, but from healing the wounds that divided people from one another. This is what victory looks like, Elise thought, studying the faces around their evening fire. Not armies defeated or wealth accumulated, but people caring for each other despite the obstacles the world places in their way. In years to come, when Nayeli had grown to womanhood and children of her own played beside the creek that bore her family's name, she would tell them stories of the winter when a desperate widow stumbled into their camp, carrying secrets that changed everything. She would speak of courage found in unexpected places of justice that came at great cost, and of love that proved stronger than the mistakes of the past. Stories matter, she would tell her children, just as Chaveo had told her. They teach us who we are and who we can become. They connect us to those who came before and guide us toward those who will come after. And always she would remember the gentle hands that tucked her in each night, and the voice that whispered comfort in the darkness. And the woman who had traveled through hell itself to become the mother her heart had always needed. Home, she would think, looking back across the years. Not a place on a map, but a feeling in the heart. The knowledge that you belong somewhere, that someone cares, whether you're safe and warm and happy. That's what Elise gave me, not just legal protection or physical care, but the certainty that I mattered to someone in this vast, difficult world. The story would become legend in the territory, passed down through generations as an example of how ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose love over fear, cooperation over competition, truth over comfortable lies. It would inspire other communities to find their own ways of building bridges across the chasms that seemed to divide different peoples. Legacy, Elise would think, in her final years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who carried forward the values she and Chaveo had tried to instill. Not the kind measured in gold or acres or political power, but the kind that lives in human hearts and spreads through acts of kindness and justice. But on that March evening, as the first spring of their new life together settled over Willow Springs, such grand thoughts were far from their minds. They were simply a family, imperfect, complicated, born from tragedy, but sustained by love, sharing the quiet contentment that comes from knowing they had found their way home at last. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the canvas walls, while outside the eternal mountain wind carried the promise of seasons yet to come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, bound by ties stronger than blood and deeper than law. The unbreakable bonds of people who had chosen to care for each other against all odds and despite all obstacles. Together, Elise thought, feeling Nayeli's steady breathing against her shoulder and seeing Chaveo's watchful silhouette in the doorway. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what family means, not perfection, but persistence. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of people willing to help solve them. And in that simple truth, in that quiet moment of connection and care, lay all the victory any of them would ever need.